My son abandoned me for 2 decades, cutting me from his life like a diseased branch. 20 years of silence, 20 years of returned letters and ignored calls. But when fortune smiled upon me, suddenly I became worth his time again. He invited me to Christmas dinner with that familiar charm, as if the years of rejection had never happened. But I had something special planned for them. When I walked into their home that snowy December evening, I smiled warmly and said, "I brought you both a surprise." Their eyes lit up with naked greed, practically counting dollar bills in their heads. But when they discovered what I'd actually prepared for them, their faces went white as the Nebraska snow outside, and their smiles crumbled like old photographs. Before we dive into this story of justice served cold, please hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means everything to this channel. The telephone's shrill cry pierced through the December stillness of my Lincoln home like a knife through silk. I was settling into my evening ritual, a cup of black coffee, the local news droning softly in the background, and the crossword puzzle that had become my nightly companion for the past 2 decades. 20 years of identical evenings in this modest rental house, each one a reminder of the life I'd lost, and the family that had discarded me like yesterday's newspaper. I almost ignored it. Telemarketers seemed to have a sixth sense about dinner time, and I'd grown tired of their rehearsed scripts and false enthusiasm. But something, perhaps hope, perhaps foolishness, made me reach for the receiver. "Dad?" The word hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs and making my knees buckle. I gripped the kitchen counter for support, my knuckles turning white against the worn formica surface. 20 years. 20 years of absolute silence. And now this casual greeting as if we'd spoken yesterday, as if the calendar had somehow skipped 2 decades of abandonment. "Ethan?" My voice came out steadier than I felt, though my hands were trembling. "This is unexpected." "Yeah, well." I could hear that familiar nervous laugh, the same one he'd used as a child when caught sneaking cookies before dinner or lying about broken vases. Some things never changed. "Listen, I know it's been a while, but Christmas is coming up, and Diana and I were talking. We'd love to have you over for dinner. You know, family time and all that." Family time. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. I stared at the faded photograph on my kitchen table, the last professional portrait we'd taken together when Ethan was 8 years old, gap-toothed and grinning, before my world came crashing down around me, before his mother poisoned him against me, before I learned that love could be conditional and loyalty could be bought. A while, I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. "Ethan, you haven't returned my calls in 20 years. Do you remember the birthday cards I sent every year until you were 30? They all came back marked, 'Return to sender.' The graduation invitation I mailed when I heard you finished college? Same thing. The Christmas cards, the get-well wishes when I heard you were sick with pneumonia 5 years ago, all ignored." There was a pause. Too long, too calculating. "Dad, come on. I've been busy. You know how it is. Building a career, starting a family, buying a house. Life gets complicated. There's never enough time for everything. Never enough time." I stood up, pacing the small kitchen where I'd eaten countless solitary meals, watching the seasons change through windows that framed my isolation. Outside, Christmas lights twinkled mockingly in neighbors' windows, families gathering for celebrations I could only observe from a distance. "But suddenly now there's time," I said quietly. "Right after the news about my lottery win hit the papers. Quite a coincidence, this sudden invitation." Another pause. Longer this time. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head, recalibrating his approach. "Dad, that's not... I'm happy for you, obviously, but that's not why I'm calling. Diana and I just thought it would be nice to reconnect. You're getting older, and I'm getting older. Life's short, you know?" I almost laughed. The audacity was breathtaking. 20 years of treating me like I was dead, and now he wanted to reconnect because life was short? I've been getting older for 20 years, Ethan. Where were you when I had my heart surgery? When I spent 3 days in Lincoln General alone, because the one person who should have cared was too busy building his career to visit his father? Where were you during all those Christmas mornings when I sat in this empty house hoping the phone would ring? His voice shifted, becoming defensive. Look, I know things haven't been perfect between us, but that's ancient history. We're family. That has to count for something. Family. The word hung between us like a curse. I thought of all the times I'd sat by this same phone, willing it to ring. All the unanswered messages, the returned letters, the birthdays spent in solitude, the Thanksgivings when I'd drive past restaurants and see families laughing together, wondering what my son looked like now, whether he was happy, whether he ever thought of me. You're right, I said finally, my voice controlled and measured. Family does count for something, I'll be there. Really? The surprise in his voice was genuine, followed quickly by something that sounded suspiciously like relief. That's great, Dad. Christmas Eve, around 6. I'll text you the address. You do that. I paused, letting the silence stretch between us like a taut wire. And Ethan, I have a surprise for you. A surprise? His voice brightened immediately, and I could practically hear the dollar signs ringing in his tone. What kind of surprise? You'll see. I hung up before he could respond, setting the phone down with deliberate care. The kitchen felt different now, charged with electricity and possibility. Outside, the snow had begun to fall, dusting the quiet streets of Lincoln with pristine white, like a blank canvas waiting for an artist's brush. I stood there for a long moment, staring at nothing, my mind drifting back to the last time I'd seen my son's face. It had been so long ago, but some wounds never truly heal. They just wait, buried under years of resignation and quiet dignity, until the right moment comes to reveal themselves again. The snow reminded me of that December 20 years ago when everything I'd built came crashing down around me. I'd been sitting in the same kitchen, though the house had felt different then, warmer, filled with the promise of family and future. But that warmth had been an illusion, and the future had arrived with divorce papers and custody arrangements that made me a stranger in my own son's life. The memory hit me like a freight train, carrying me back to that cold December morning when my marriage died and my relationship with my son was buried alongside it. I'd been sitting at our old kitchen table, the one Diana took in the divorce, drinking coffee and reading the morning paper when I heard the sound of suitcases being dragged across hardwood floors. You're pathetic, Gerald. Diana's voice echoed in my memory, sharp and cruel as broken glass. 45 years old, and what do you have to show for it? A dead-end job at Morrison Associates, a mortgage we can barely afford, and dreams that'll never amount to anything. I remembered standing in the doorway of our bedroom, watching her fold clothes with mechanical precision, each movement an act of condemnation. The woman I'd loved for 15 years, the mother of my child, was dismantling our life together as casually as she might sort laundry. I thought we were happy, I'd said, my voice barely above a whisper. Happy? She'd laughed, a sound like breaking glass. When was the last time you surprised me with anything nice? When did you last take me somewhere that didn't require checking our bank balance first? Richard treats me like a queen. Richard. Her new boyfriend with the BMW in the corner office. The one who'd been calling our house for months before I finally understood what was happening. The one who could afford the restaurants and vacations that my accountant's salary couldn't cover. What about Ethan? I'd asked, grasping at straws. He needs stability. He needs his father. He needs a winner for a father, she'd shot back, slamming the suitcase shut with finality. All you've ever been is a disappointment. To me, to him, to everyone who's ever believed in you. The divorce had been swift and brutal. Diana's lawyer was expensive and ruthless. Mine was overworked and underpaid, juggling dozens of cases while hers focused solely on destroying me. She'd walked away with the house, the car, and most devastating of all, our son's loyalty. Ethan had been 18 then, old enough to choose sides. He'd chosen hers without hesitation, his young mind poisoned by months of whispered conversations and carefully planted seeds of doubt about his failure of a father. "Mom's right," he'd said during one of our last conversations, his voice cold with teenage certainty. "You're just making excuses. Maybe if you'd tried harder, been more successful, none of this would have happened." I'd tried to explain, to make him understand that success wasn't just about money, that love and loyalty were worth more than corner offices and German cars. But he'd already made up his mind. Richard had influence, connections, and most importantly, the ability to provide the lifestyle Diana wanted for herself and her son. What did I have? A small apartment in Lincoln and a broken heart. 20 years of silence followed. 20 years of birthday cards returned unopened. Of phone calls that went straight to voicemail and were never returned. Of Christmas mornings spent alone in this quiet house, wondering if my son ever thought of me, if he ever regretted the choice he'd made. I'd learned to live with the emptiness, to find meaning in small things, my work, my books, the occasional kindness of neighbors, but I'd never stopped hoping, never stopped believing that someday my son would remember the man who'd taught him to ride a bike, who'd stayed up all night when he had the flu, who'd loved him unconditionally even when that love wasn't enough to keep our family together. Now, standing in my kitchen with the echo of his voice still ringing in my ears, I realized that someday had finally arrived, but not in the way I'd dreamed it would. The lottery win had changed everything, but not in the way most people might expect. It wasn't the money itself that transformed me. It was what the money revealed about the people I'd once called family. The transformation had actually begun years before that lucky ticket. It started in the dark months following the divorce, when loneliness settled into my bones like Lincoln's winter cold. I'd needed something to fill the endless hours, something to distract me from the silence that pressed against my eardrums like water. That's when I discovered my gift for numbers. Not just the accounting kind I'd been doing at Morrison Associates for 15 years, but the kind that could build empires from dust and dreams. It started with a foreclosure notice I'd seen in the Lincoln Journal-Star back in 2008. A small duplex on the south side of town, nothing special to look at. Peeling paint, overgrown yard, broken front steps. But the price caught my attention like a lighthouse beam in fog. While everyone else was running scared from the housing market, I saw opportunity wrapped in disaster. I drove past the property on my lunch break, noting the solid bones beneath the neglect. That night, I spread newspaper clippings across my kitchen table like tarot cards, studying mortgage rates and property values with the intensity of a scholar deciphering ancient texts. The old wooden chair creaked under my weight as I leaned forward, calculating risks on the backs of utility bills and grocery receipts. My heart was pounding as I signed the loan papers, committing every penny I'd saved since the divorce, plus a small loan against my modest retirement account. "You sure about this, Mr. Brooks?" The banker had looked at me over his wire-rimmed glasses, skeptical. "Real estate's a dangerous game right now. A lot of folks losing their shirts." "I'm sure," I'd replied, signing the papers with steady hands despite the fear churning in my stomach. The duplex became my evening project, my weekend obsession. I'd drive there after work, tools rattling in my trunk, and spend hours scraping paint, fixing leaks, replacing rotted boards. The physical labor felt good, purposeful in a way my desk job never had. For the first time in years, I was creating something instead of just surviving. 6 months later, I had tenants. A young couple just starting out, grateful for clean walls and working plumbing. The rent covered my mortgage with a small profit left over. I reinvested immediately, buying another property, then another. The Great Recession became my golden opportunity. While others lost fortunes, I built mine quietly, one careful purchase at a time. I learned to read neighborhoods like books, to spot potential where others saw only problems. The midnight calculations became routine, spreadsheets glowing on my computer screen as I tracked income and expenses with methodical precision. By 2015, I owned 12 properties across Lincoln. By 2020, 23. I still lived in the same small rental house, still drove the same reliable Honda, still wore the same modest clothes. But beneath the surface, I was accumulating something I'd never had before. Real power. The kind that came from smart decisions made in patient solitude. The lottery win had been luck, pure and simple. $15 million tax-free from a ticket I'd bought on a whim at Casey's General Store. But it landed on a foundation I'd built through sweat, sacrifice, and 17 years of careful planning. The story had made the local news first, then the state papers. Within a week, my phone had started ringing again. Old friends I hadn't heard from in years suddenly remembered my existence. Distant relatives I'd forgotten I had emerged from the woodwork with stories about how close we'd always been. And then today, the call I'd been waiting for and dreading in equal measure. I walked to my desk and pulled out the folder I'd been assembling for months. Bank statements, investment records, legal documents, everything I'd need for Christmas Eve. Everything I'd need to show my son exactly what kind of man his father had become. The snow continued to fall outside, covering Lincoln in pristine white. Soon, very soon, I'd have my chance to give Ethan and Diana the surprise they'd been waiting for their entire lives. But something told me it wouldn't be quite what they expected. Sleep had abandoned me completely that night. By dawn, I knew what I had to do. The morning light cast long shadows across my kitchen floor as I sat with my coffee, staring at the phone like it was a loaded weapon. One more test. One final confirmation of what I already suspected in my heart. I picked up the receiver and dialed Ethan's number, my fingers steady despite the weight of what I was about to do. "Dad?" He sounded surprised, maybe even pleased. "I didn't expect to hear from you so soon." "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday," I said, settling back in my chair. "About Christmas, about family, about reconnecting." "Yeah?" There was something in his voice. Hope, maybe, or just calculation masked as emotion. "I need to tell you something, Ethan. I'm in trouble." The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. "What kind of trouble?" "Financial trouble." I let the words hang in the air, noting how his breathing changed, how the quality of his attention shifted. "I'm afraid I made some terrible decisions with my lottery winnings. Got caught up in cryptocurrency trading, Bitcoin, Ethereum, all those digital currencies everyone was talking about." "Oh." The single syllable carried more information than a paragraph. Not sympathy, not concern, just disappointment. "How bad is it?" he asked, and I could hear him mentally recalculating whatever plans he'd been making. "Pretty bad. Lost most of it in a market crash last week. Volatile investments. They warned me about that, but I thought I knew better." I paused, letting him absorb this fabrication. I might have enough left to cover Christmas dinner, but not much more. The silence that followed was deafening. I could almost hear his thoughts shifting, retuning his expectations like a radio dial searching for a clearer signal. "Well," he said finally, his voice noticeably cooler than Lincoln in January. That's really unfortunate, Dad. I guess these things happen." I waited, gave him a chance to offer comfort, support, anything that might resemble filial concern. The seconds ticked by on my kitchen clock, each one a small revelation. "So, about Christmas," he continued, clearing his throat. "Maybe it would be better if you didn't come this year. I mean, with everything you're dealing with, you probably need to focus on getting your finances sorted out." There it was, the mask slipping completely away, revealing the truth underneath like paint washing off in the rain. "I see," I said, keeping my voice neutral, though inside I felt a cold satisfaction settling in my chest. "So the invitation is off the table. It's just, you understand, right? Diana's been planning this big meal, and we were kind of counting on—" He let the sentence trail off, but we both knew how it ended. They'd been counting on my money, not my presence. "Less stress for everyone," I said. "Exactly. When you get back on your feet, we'll definitely get together. Maybe Easter or something." When I got back on my feet, of course. "Look, I have to run. Conference call in 5 minutes. But we'll talk soon, okay?" The line went dead before I could respond. I set the phone down and stared out at the snow-covered streets of Lincoln, watching early commuters scrape ice from their windshields and warm up their cars. 20 years of silence, and the moment they thought I was broke again, it was back to radio silence. I'd known it would happen, had orchestrated it even, but having it confirmed so brutally still stung. Not because I was surprised, but because it crystallized everything I'd suspected about their motives. Love with conditions wasn't love at all. It was a business transaction. The phone rang 15 minutes later. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Gerald? Diana's voice hit me like a cold wind, still carrying that same breathless quality she'd used when she wanted something, though age had roughened the edges. I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from Ethan. Diana, how thoughtful of you to reach out after all these years. Listen, I know things ended badly between us, but we have a son together. That has to count for something, right? I could hear rustling in the background, whispers, then Ethan's voice, faint but clear. Ask for more. Tell him it's urgent. Ethan's in trouble, Gerald, real trouble. His business, you know how volatile the startup world is. He's got investors breathing down his neck, and if he doesn't come up with the money soon. She let the sentence hang, pregnant with implication. More whispers. Say it's for the grandkids' future. It's for the grandkids' future, Diana continued seamlessly. You don't want them to suffer because of business problems, do you? I watched steam rise from my coffee cup, thinking of all the times I'd fallen for this routine during our marriage. The manufactured crisis, the emotional manipulation, the way she'd always known exactly which buttons to push. How much? I asked. Well, 200,000 would cover the immediate problems, but if you could stretch to 300, another whisper, maybe 400 just to be safe. $400,000, asked for as casually as borrowing sugar from a neighbor. I see. Gerald, I know you're angry about the past, but this is bigger than our problems. This is about family, about doing what's right. What's right? I repeated the words slowly, tasting their bitter irony. Tell me, Diana, what was right about 20 years of silence? What was right about returning birthday cards unopened? What was right about teaching our son to treat his father like a stranger? Her voice hardened. That's ancient history. We're talking about now, about your son's future. I won't give you a cent. The words came out cleaner than I'd expected. No anger, no bitterness, just simple fact. What? She sounded genuinely shocked. Gerald, you can't be serious. You won millions of dollars. What's a few $100,000 to help your own son? Not a cent, I repeated. Not now, not ever. But you love him. You're his father. How can you just abandon him when he needs you most? I thought of all the times I'd needed them, all the reaching out that had been ignored, all the love that had been thrown back in my face like garbage. I learned from the best. You're making a mistake. You'll regret this. I don't think I will. The line went dead. She'd hung up on me. Just like that. I set the phone down and watched the snow continue to fall outside my window, covering Lincoln in white silence. The quiet felt different now, not empty but full of possibility. I'd passed the test. 20 years ago, I would have written the check, desperate to buy back their affection. But the man I'd become understood something the old Gerald never had. Respect couldn't be purchased, and love that came with a price tag wasn't love at all. The phone rang again an hour later. I let it go to voicemail, already knowing what I'd hear. When I played it back, Ethan's voice filled my kitchen, desperate and pleading. Dad, I know what Diana told you, but she exaggerated everything. I'm not in that much trouble. Maybe we could just talk about a smaller amount. Even 50,000 would help. Please call me back. I deleted the message and began my real work. If they wanted to play games, I needed to understand the rules. I spent the afternoon digging into the lives my son and ex-wife had built while ignoring mine, using the investigative skills I'd developed during my real estate ventures. I started with my old Lincoln business network, contacts I'd made during 17 years of careful property investment. A few phone calls revealed interesting information about Ethan's startup, or rather, its spectacular failure. Brooks Tech Solutions? Jim Patterson from the Chamber of Commerce laughed bitterly when I mentioned the name. That kid burned through investor money like it was confetti, promised revolutionary software, delivered nothing but excuses and expensive lunches. What happened to the investors? They're not happy. Word is he owes close to $2 million between the venture capital firm and private backers. Some of them are getting lawyers involved. $2 million in debt. That explained the desperation, the sudden interest in reconnecting with dear old dad. The internet provided the rest of the puzzle. Ethan's LinkedIn showed a string of failed ventures, each one lasting just long enough to attract funding before collapsing under the weight of his incompetence. His Instagram painted a picture of lavish lifestyle, expensive restaurants, luxury cars, designer clothes, all funded by other people's money. But it was Diana's Facebook that truly disgusted me. Her profile showed a woman playing the victim with masterful precision, photos of herself looking worn and tired, coupled with posts about her brave battle against cancer. Day 47 of chemo, read one post from last month. The treatments are draining, but your donations keep me fighting. Every dollar helps with medical bills and experimental treatments my insurance won't cover. Cancer warrior, never give up. I scrolled through months of similar posts, each one more manipulative than the last. Thousands of dollars in donations from well-meaning strangers, all based on a lie that made my stomach turn, because I knew Diana wasn't sick. She was just greedy. A quick call to my contact at Lincoln General confirmed my suspicions. No cancer treatments, no chemotherapy, not even a suspicious mole removal in the past 5 years. I cross-referenced her posts with Ethan's spending patterns on social media. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Every major donation spike coincided with Ethan posting about a new business opportunity or expensive purchase. They were working together, a mother and son team bleeding money from strangers while ignoring the man who'd actually earned his wealth through honest work. I compiled everything into a folder using the same methodical approach I'd employed for my real estate investments. Bank records, social media screenshots, testimonials from burned investors, a paper trail that painted a clear picture of systematic fraud and emotional manipulation. The irony wasn't lost on me. They dismissed me as a failure, a man not worth their time or attention. But that same man had built a fortune through patience and strategy, while they'd built nothing but debt and deception. As evening fell over Lincoln, I closed my laptop and allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. I was no longer the victim in this story. I was becoming the author. The phone rang again. Probably another desperate attempt to squeeze money from their rich father. I let it ring, listening to the sound echo through my quiet house. Let them wonder. Let them worry. Christmas was still days away, and I had work to do. Dawn brought focus, and I reached for the phone before my morning coffee had finished brewing. The notes from yesterday's research lay spread across my kitchen table like a battle plan. Time to see just how far my son's greed would take him. Ethan answered on the second ring, his voice carrying a note of desperate hope. "Dad, I'm so glad you called. I was worried about you after what Diana said." "I have good news," I said, settling into my chair with deliberate calm. "Remember those cryptocurrency investments I told you about? The ones that wiped me out?" "Yeah?" His voice sharpened with interest. "Well, I managed to recover most of it. Day trading, you know. Bought the dip and rode it back up. Turned out better than I expected." The silence stretched for exactly 3 seconds. I counted. That's fantastic, Dad. I'm so relieved. I was worried about you." The lie came so easily to him, without a hint of shame or embarrassment about how quickly he'd dismissed me when he thought I was broke. "So I was thinking," I continued, "maybe Christmas is back on, if the invitation still stands." Of course it does. Diana will be thrilled. She's been looking forward to seeing you." Another lie, smooth as silk. "Actually, Dad, speaking of Christmas, His voice shifted, becoming more intimate, more son-like. I know this is awkward to bring up, but since you mentioned your financial recovery, I was wondering if you might consider helping me with something. I smiled grimly, though he couldn't see it. Here it comes. Oh? It's this business opportunity. Time-sensitive, you know. The kind of deal that could set me up for life. But I need to move quickly. $300,000 would cover my entry stake. $300,000. Not a loan request. A demand wrapped in opportunity speak. That's a significant amount, Ethan. I know. But Dad, this isn't just about me. It's about securing the family's future. Your grandchildren's future. And honestly, after everything that's happened between us, I thought this might be a way to, start fresh. The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. Family, grandchildren, fresh starts, all the buttons he thought would work on the man I used to be. Tell me more about this opportunity, I said, injecting just enough interest to keep him talking. It's in the tech sector. AI development, actually. Revolutionary stuff. The initial investors are projecting returns of 500% within 18 months. The same pitch he'd probably used on his previous victims. I wondered if he'd even bothered to change the numbers. 500%. That sounds almost too good to be true. I know it sounds crazy, but Dad, that's how these breakthrough technologies work. Remember when Bitcoin was nothing? The people who got in early made fortunes. I let the silence hang between us, as if I were genuinely considering it. In truth, I was marveling at how completely he'd revealed himself. No mention of paying me back. No acknowledgement of the 20 years of silence. Just his hand out, palm up, waiting. I'll need to think about it, I said finally. Of course. But Dad, time really is a factor here. The window closes after Christmas, so if you're going to do this, we'd need to move fast. The urgency was manufactured, of course. Create pressure, eliminate time for second thoughts. Classic con artist tactics that I recognized from my years in business. I understand. Let me sleep on it. That's all I can ask. And Dad, thanks for even considering it. It means everything to me. I hung up and sat back in my chair, watching the morning sunlight glint off my notepad. He'd taken the bait completely. No suspicion, no questions about how I'd recovered my losses so quickly. Just pure, undiluted greed. I picked up my pen and wrote a single word. Confirmed. 20 years of silence. And now he wanted $300,000 based on a 5-minute phone call. The audacity was almost admirable in its brazenness. Almost. With the bait set, I turned to the contacts I'd compiled during yesterday's research. The investors Ethan had burned deserved to know where their money had gone, and where the man who'd taken it was hiding. I started with the venture capital firm first. The receptionist transferred me to a Mr. Davidson, whose voice carried the weariness of a man who'd seen too many promises broken. You're calling about Ethan Brooks? His voice sharpened immediately. What's your connection to him? I'm someone who believes in accountability, I said carefully. I understand he owes your firm a considerable amount of money. Considerable is an understatement. We're talking about deliberate fraud, but he's vanished. No forwarding address, no contact information. Our lawyers are hitting dead ends everywhere. What if I told you I knew exactly where he was? Davidson's chair squeaked as he leaned forward. I'm listening. Lincoln, Nebraska. He's been hiding there for months, living at his mother's house while planning his next scheme. I provided the address, phone number, and social media evidence I'd gathered. Davidson's excitement was palpable through the phone line. How do you know all this? Let's just say I have a personal interest in seeing justice done. After Davidson, I contacted the 3 private investors Ethan had named on his failed company's registration documents. Their reactions were remarkably similar. Initial skepticism, followed by barely contained rage when I provided proof of his whereabouts. That little weasel, growled Helen Martinez, who'd lost $50,000 in his solar panel startup. I knew he was hiding somewhere. My lawyer said we'd need a private investigator to track him down. Consider the investigation complete, I said. I'm also sending you evidence of his current lifestyle. Social media posts showing expensive purchases, restaurant visits, luxury items, all while claiming bankruptcy. By noon, I'd contacted 7 investors. By 2 o'clock, they were forming a collective lawsuit. By 3, they had a conference call scheduled with their legal teams. I sat back in my home office, surrounded by papers and screenshots, listening to my phone ring with updates. Each call brought more satisfaction than the last. "Mr. Anonymous," Davidson said when he called back. "I don't know who you are, but you've given us exactly what we needed. We're filing emergency motions to freeze his accounts and seize any assets we can find. How quickly can you move? We're talking days, not weeks. Christmas might be very interesting for Mr. Brooks." I filed away Davidson's business card with the others, creating a neat stack of consequences. For 20 years, Ethan had lived without facing accountability for his actions. That was about to change. The phone rang again. This time it was Helen Martinez. "Our lawyers are coordinating with the others. We're going to hit him from all sides simultaneously. No more hiding, no more games." "I'm glad I could help." "One more thing," she said. "When we find him, and we will find him, I want to thank you properly. You've given us hope when we thought all was lost." I hung up and stared out at the Lincoln streets where my son thought he was safe, where he thought he could continue his schemes without consequence. The snow had stopped falling, leaving the world crisp and clear. Perfect visibility for what was coming next. I opened my laptop and began typing an email to the local news station. If Ethan wanted to play games with other people's money, perhaps it was time Lincoln knew what kind of neighbor they had. The following afternoon, I drove across town to gather the final piece of evidence I needed. St. Elizabeth's Hospital sat on the east side of Lincoln, its brick facade dusted with snow, and I parked in the visitor lot with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The automatic doors whooshed open, releasing that familiar antiseptic smell that always reminded me of my own heart surgery years ago. The one Ethan hadn't bothered to visit me for. I walked through the lobby, past families clutching flowers and worry, and found Janet Morrison in the medical records office. She was a woman I'd known since my accounting days, when I'd handled the books for her late husband's dental practice. She looked up from her computer with surprise. "Gerald Brooks, what brings you here on a day like this?" "Hello, Janet. I need a favor, and I know this is delicate territory." Her expression shifted to wariness. "What kind of favor?" I pulled out a business card from Davidson's firm. "I'm helping with a fraud investigation. There's a woman claiming cancer treatment she never received, collecting donations under false pretenses. Lives are being affected." Janet studied the card, then looked back at me with growing concern. "Gerald, you know I can't just—" "Diana Brooks, my ex-wife." The words tasted bitter. "She's been running a scam on social media, claiming chemotherapy treatments that never happened. Good people are sending money they can't afford because they believe she's dying." Something shifted in Janet's eyes. She'd always been a woman who valued honesty above bureaucracy, and the thought of someone profiting from fake cancer clearly disgusted her. "This stays between us," she said quietly, glancing around the empty office. 20 minutes later, I sat in my car reviewing the printouts. Clean medical history going back 5 years. Routine checkups, dental cleanings, a minor sinus infection last spring. Not one oncology appointment, no chemotherapy, no cancer diagnosis of any kind. The fluorescent hospital lights cast dark shadows across the papers as I read every detail. Each page confirmed what I'd already known in my heart. Diana's entire cancer story was fabricated from beginning to end. Every donation, every sympathy message, every prayer sent her way was based on an elaborate lie designed to fund her son's failing lifestyle. I tucked the records into my coat pocket, feeling their weight against my chest like armor. The drive home through Lincoln's quiet streets gave me time to process what I'd uncovered. Snow fell steadily, coating the world in white, making everything look clean and new. For a moment, Sitting at a red light, I wondered if I was crossing ethical lines. These were private medical records obtained through personal connections rather than proper channels. But then I thought of the families sending $20 bills they couldn't spare, believing they were helping a dying woman fight for her life. The light turned green and I drove on. Sometimes justice required getting your hands dirty. Back home, I placed the records in my folder next to the investor information and lawsuit confirmations. 3 separate angles of attack, all carefully orchestrated, all perfectly timed for maximum impact. Ethan and Diana had spent 20 years believing they were smarter than everyone around them, that they could manipulate and use people without consequence. Tomorrow would test that theory. I glanced out my kitchen window where Christmas lights twinkled in neighbors' windows and allowed myself a smile. The holiday season was about to become very interesting for the Brooks family. The phone rang one more time that evening. I let it go to voicemail, already knowing it would be another urgent request or manufactured crisis from my loving family. But their time for making demands was running out. After tomorrow, they'd be too busy dealing with consequences to bother their poor forgotten father. When I played the message back, it was Ethan's voice, more desperate than before. "Dad, I know you're probably sleeping, but I couldn't wait until morning. I've been thinking about our conversation and I realize I may have come across as too pushy about the investment opportunity. I just want you to know that whatever you decide is fine. We're just grateful to have you back in our lives. Family is what matters most, right? Anyway, call me when you get this. Love you, Dad." Love you, Dad. Words I hadn't heard in 20 years, now tossed around like spare change because he thought I had money to give him. I deleted the message and settled in to review my plans one final time. Christmas Eve was only hours away, and every piece needed to be in perfect position. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with that crystalline quality that made everything look sharp and defined. I spent the early hours making final phone calls, confirming that all the moving pieces were aligned. Davidson called first. "Everything's in place. The papers will be served this afternoon. We've coordinated with local law enforcement to ensure he doesn't try to run." "Perfect timing," I said, watching the sunrise paint my kitchen walls gold. Helen Martinez called next. "The news story goes live at 6 tonight. Channel 8 wants to interview some of the victims. We're going to make sure everyone knows what kind of man your son really is." Janet from the hospital texted me. "Authorities contacted about the medical records. Anonymous tip led them to investigate donation fraud. They're very interested." By noon, everything was set in motion. The machinery of justice was grinding forward, and there was nothing Ethan or Diana could do to stop it. They'd built their house of lies on a foundation of sand, and the tide was finally coming in. I dressed carefully for Christmas Eve dinner, not too formal, not too casual. Just a father going to see his son after 20 years of separation. I drove across town to the address Ethan had texted me, rehearsing my performance one final time. The house sat in a newer development, all vinyl siding and identical landscaping. Christmas lights were strung unevenly across the porch, and I could see shapes moving behind the windows. Probably Diana fussing over last-minute preparations while Ethan counted imaginary profits from his fictional investment opportunity. I sat in my car for a moment, watching their domestic tableau through lit windows. After tonight, their world would never be the same. The thought should have filled me with triumph, but instead I felt something more complex. Sadness mixed with satisfaction, justice tempered by the knowledge that it had taken 20 years to reach this moment. I got out of the car and walked up the driveway, my footsteps crunching on freshly fallen snow. The porch light cast long shadows and I could hear laughter from inside, artificial and forced, the kind people put on when they want something. I rang the doorbell and waited, arranging my face into what I hoped looked like grandfatherly anticipation. "Dad." Ethan opened the door with arms spread wide, as if we'd been having weekly dinners for years instead of enduring 2 decades of radio silence. "You made it. Come in, come in." Diana appeared behind him, thinner than I remembered, but with that same calculating look in her eyes that had once fooled me into thinking it was love. "Gerald. Oh, it's so wonderful to see you." You look prosperous. I stepped into their warm living room, noting the expensive furniture that didn't quite match, the oversized television mounted like a shrine on the wall, the designer bags carelessly draped over chairs, all purchased with other people's money, no doubt. A museum of financial fraud disguised as domestic comfort. "Thank you for having me," I said, hanging my coat on their rack with deliberate care. "I brought something special for later. A surprise for both of you." Their eyes lit up immediately like slot machines hitting jackpot. Diana clasped her hands together in a gesture I remembered from our marriage, the one she'd used when she wanted something expensive. "A surprise? How thoughtful. You shouldn't have." But of course, in their minds, I should have. I owed them everything simply for existing, for being related to them, for having the audacity to succeed after they'd written me off as a failure. We sat down to dinner at a table that could have fed 12, loaded with dishes that looked impressive, but tasted like they'd come from the grocery store deli. Ethan carved the turkey with theatrical flourish while Diana filled wine glasses and peppered me with questions about my recovery from the cryptocurrency losses. "So fortunate that you managed to bounce back," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "These market fluctuations can be so unpredictable." "Indeed they can," I agreed, cutting my turkey into precise pieces. "But I've learned to be more careful about who I trust with financial advice." Ethan launched into a detailed explanation of his AI investment opportunity, complete with projected returns and manufactured urgency. I nodded along, asking questions that made me sound interested while watching their faces grow more animated with each perceived sign of my willingness to invest. "The window really does close after Christmas," Ethan emphasized, his eyes bright with greed. "These Silicon Valley opportunities don't stay open long. First come, first served, you know." "I understand completely," I said, sipping my wine. "Timing is everything in business." Diana leaned forward, her voice taking on that intimate tone she'd perfected during our marriage. "Gerald, we know this is a big decision, but we truly believe this could be life-changing for all of us, for the grandchildren's future. The grandchildren I'd never met. The family I'd been excluded from for 20 years. Now suddenly they were part of my responsibility, my legacy to protect and provide for." The knock came just as Diana was serving dessert. Sharp, authoritative, the kind of knock that meant business. Ethan frowned, setting down his fork with a clink that seemed to echo through the suddenly tense room. "I wasn't expecting anyone," he said, walking to the front door. Diana and I followed, our footsteps creating a strange procession toward whatever waited on the other side. Through the window, I could see a man in a dark coat holding an envelope, his breath visible in the cold night air. Official business on Christmas Eve. How deliciously appropriate. "Ethan Brooks?" the man asked when the door opened. "Yes?" "You've been served." He handed over the envelope and turned to leave, his job done with efficient finality. Ethan stared at the papers, his face draining of color as he read. The transformation was remarkable. From confident schemer to trapped animal in the space of 30 seconds. This can't be right," he whispered. "What is it, honey?" Diana peered over his shoulder, her voice carrying the first note of genuine panic I'd heard all evening. "It's a lawsuit, multiple lawsuits." His hands shook as he flipped through pages of legal documents. "The investors, they found me. Emergency asset freezes, demands for restitution, criminal fraud allegations. How did they even know where you were?" His voice cracked like a teenager's. I maintained my concerned grandfather expression while internally savoring every moment of his panic. 20 years of planning had led to this single perfect moment of revelation. "Oh no," Diana said, reading over his shoulder with growing horror. "Gerald, this is terrible timing. Right during Christmas dinner." "These things have a way of catching up with people," I observed mildly, cutting another piece of turkey as if lawsuits were as common as snowfall in Nebraska. Ethan was pacing now, running his hands through his hair in a gesture I remembered from his childhood when he'd broken something valuable and was trying to figure out how to avoid punishment. "I need to call my lawyer. No, I need to get out of here." They could freeze everything. The house, the accounts, everything. How much do they want? Diana asked, though I could see in her eyes that she already knew the answer would be devastating. 2 million plus damages plus interest. He looked like he might be sick all over their expensive carpet. Diana turned to me with that familiar expression I remembered from our marriage, the one that appeared whenever she needed something expensive fixed or replaced. Gerald, she said carefully, her voice taking on that honeyed tone that had once fooled me into thinking she cared about more than my wallet. I know this is awkward, but Ethan's family, he's our son, and with your recent good fortune, maybe you could help with the legal fees, just until this gets sorted out. She reached for her phone, probably to calculate exactly how much she thought she could extract from me in this moment of crisis. I smiled at her, the same patient smile I'd worn through 20 years of manipulation and dismissal. Actually, Diana, I think you're going to have bigger problems than legal fees very soon. She looked up from her phone, pausing mid-calculation. What do you mean? I watched her navigate to Facebook with practiced efficiency, no doubt planning to craft another sob story about her cancer battle and her son's business troubles. The first notification badge showed 127 messages. Her eyebrows lifted slightly, but she wasn't concerned yet. Popular people got lots of messages, especially during the holidays. Then she started scrolling. What the hell? She whispered, her face going pale as fresh snow. The phone trembled in her hands as message after message filled her screen, angry, accusatory, demanding answers she couldn't give without admitting the truth. Ethan, what is it? He leaned over her shoulder, lawsuit papers forgotten for the moment. They're saying I faked having cancer. Her voice was barely audible. Look at these comments. Fraud. Scammer. Disgusting. There are hundreds of them. I sipped my wine and watched the show unfold, 20 years of patience finally paying dividends. She scrolled faster, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. There's a news article. Lincoln woman exposed for fake cancer scam. How did they... Who would... Ethan grabbed the phone and read aloud, his voice growing weaker with each word. Anonymous source provides medical records proving Diana Brooks never received cancer treatment, despite collecting thousands in donations for chemotherapy costs. This can't be happening, Diana's voice cracked. Someone hacked my medical records. This is illegal. Is it true? Ethan asked, his voice deadly quiet. Of course it's not true. I'm fighting cancer. You know I'm fighting cancer. But even as she said it, I could see the doubt creeping into Ethan's eyes. He was many things, a liar, a cheat, a disappointment as a son, but he wasn't completely stupid. The medical records were too detailed, too official to be fabricated. Jesus, Mom, Jesus Christ. He ran his hands through his hair again. Do you know what this means? They're going to investigate everything. My lawsuits, your donations, all of it. Diana's phone buzzed with another notification, then another. The messages were pouring in now like water through a broken dam. Former donors demanding refunds, reporters requesting interviews, authorities asking questions that had no good answers. Make it stop, she whispered, staring at the screen as if it might burst into flames. Make it stop. I can't make it stop, Ethan snapped. You did this. You brought this on us. I didn't do anything. Someone set me up. They both turned to me simultaneously as if suddenly remembering I was there. Their faces showed a mixture of desperation and hope, the same expression I'd seen countless times during our marriage when Diana needed something expensive or when Ethan had gotten into trouble as a teenager. Gerald, Diana said, her voice becoming honeyed despite the panic evident in every line of her body. You said you had a surprise for us. Please tell me you brought what we discussed, the money for Ethan's investment. We need it now more than ever. Ethan nodded eagerly, grasping at this last straw like a drowning man. Dad, I know this looks bad, but we can fix this. With your help, we can hire the best lawyers, the best public relations firms. We can make this all go away. I stood up slowly, setting my wine glass down with deliberate care. Their eyes followed my every movement, hungry and desperate, like wolves watching a farmer with a fresh kill. "Actually," I said, my voice calm and measured, "I've already delivered your surprise." The words hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. I walked to the coat rack and pulled on my jacket, taking my time with each button while they watched in growing confusion and panic. "What do you mean?" Diana's voice was sharp with rising hysteria. "I mean exactly what I said. I've already given you what you deserve." Ethan stepped forward, his face flushed with desperation. "But the money? You said you'd consider the investment. There is no money, not for you, not for your schemes, not for your lies." I walked to the door, their confused voices following me like the sound of breaking glass. "Gerald, wait. You can't just leave. We need to talk about this." But I was already turning the handle, stepping out into the cold Nebraska night where the air was clean and honest, where the snow covered everything in pristine white. The door closed behind me with a soft click, cutting off their pleas and protests. I walked to my car without looking back, though I could see the warm glow of their living room window in my peripheral vision. Inside, they were probably still trying to process what had just happened, still believing they could manipulate their way out of the consequences that were rushing toward them like an avalanche. The engine started smoothly, and I pulled away from the curb. In my rearview mirror, I saw a figure appear at the window, Ethan probably watching his meal ticket disappear into the darkness. 20 years of silence, 20 years of dismissal, 20 years of treating me like I didn't exist. Now they knew exactly how that felt. The weeks that followed were a symphony of justice played out across Lincoln's winter landscape. Reports trickled in through the city's tight-knit network of gossip and genuine concern, each update more satisfying than the last. Janet from the hospital called first, her voice carrying a mixture of vindication and worry. "Gerald, I hope I did the right thing. The authorities contacted me about those medical records. Turns out someone had anonymously tipped them off about the donation fraud. I'm sure you handled it appropriately," I said, stirring sugar into my morning coffee while watching the snow fall outside my kitchen window. "The story's got legs," she continued. "Local news picked it up, then the state papers. Something about it just caught people's attention. Maybe the audacity of faking cancer for money. Other updates came through chance encounters at the grocery store, casual conversations with neighbors, fragments of information that painted a picture of systematic collapse. The legal proceedings had moved with surprising speed. The investors, armed with evidence and fueled by righteous anger, had presented an airtight case that left no room for doubt or sympathy. The judge had shown no mercy for someone who'd stolen retirement funds and college savings to finance a lifestyle built on lies. "Lost everything," reported Tom Harrison, whose law firm had handled some of the paperwork. "House, car, bank accounts. Had to move back in with his mother, if you can believe that. Course, she's got her own problems now." Indeed she did. Diana's situation was arguably worse than her son's. The cancer fraud had struck a nerve with the public in ways Ethan's investor schemes never could. People could understand bad business deals, but faking terminal illness crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Her Facebook page had become a wasteland of angry comments and demands for refunds. The local news had run a follow-up story revealing how her fake treatments had coincided with promoted miracle cures and unproven supplements, suggesting she'd been profiting from desperate people's hope in multiple ways. "Fraud charges are likely," mentioned Carol from the library, where I'd started volunteering on Tuesday mornings. "The district attorney's office is taking it seriously. They don't like it when people steal from cancer patients, even fake ones." But the most satisfying update came from an unexpected source. Sarah, the mail carrier, had been following the story and couldn't help sharing what she'd observed during her rounds. "I delivered a bunch of registered letters to that address yesterday," she said, referring to the house where Ethan and Diana had been forced to take refuge together. "Legal documents by the look of them. The woman who answered the door, his mother, I think, she looked like she'd aged 10 years in the past month." I thanked her and went inside, feeling something I hadn't experienced in decades: complete peace. The isolation that had once felt like punishment now revealed itself as preparation. For 20 years, I'd learned to live without their approval, without their presence, without the constant drain of their demands and manipulations. When they finally faced consequences for their actions, I was already whole, already complete, already free. Spring arrived early that year, and with it came a revelation I hadn't expected. Freedom from resentment was like recovering from a long illness. Suddenly, colors seemed brighter, food tasted better, and possibilities stretched out before me like an endless highway. I took my first real vacation in 20 years, driving through the Rocky Mountains in my reliable Honda, staying in small towns where nobody knew my story or cared about my past. In Colorado Springs, I met a retired teacher named Margaret, who told me about her volunteer work with literacy programs. "There's nothing quite like watching someone read their first complete sentence," she said over coffee in a diner that served pie as big as dinner plates. "It's like watching someone discover they have wings." By the time I returned to Lincoln, I'd signed up to help adults learn to read. It felt good to build something instead of just tearing down, to create rather than destroy. The community center where I volunteered was full of people who'd faced real challenges: job loss, family problems, health crises, and had chosen to move forward instead of backward. Their resilience put my own struggles in perspective and reminded me that everyone carries invisible burdens. "You seem different," observed Father Martinez from St. Mary's, where I'd started attending Mass again. "Lighter somehow." He was right. The weight I'd carried for 20 years had lifted, leaving room for things I'd forgotten I enjoyed: books that weren't about business or revenge, long walks without purpose, conversations with people who valued honesty over profit. I still lived in the same modest house, still drove the same reliable car, but now these things felt like choices rather than limitations. I had enough money to live anywhere, do anything. But I discovered that satisfaction came from different sources than I'd expected. The phone rang occasionally, Ethan's number appearing on the caller ID with decreasing frequency. I let them all go to voicemail, listening later to rambling apologies mixed with subtle requests for financial help. I deleted each message without a second thought. One evening in May, as I was planning a trip to visit the Grand Canyon, my phone rang with an unknown number. Curiosity got the better of me. "Is this Gerald Brooks?" The voice was young, female, nervous. "Yes. My name is Sarah Peterson. I'm your granddaughter." The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair, staring out at the spring evening where neighbors were working in their gardens. "I'm sorry to call out of the blue like this," she continued. "I know there's been issues between you and Dad. But I'm 18 now and I wanted to meet my grandfather." "How did you get my number?" "Phone book, actually. Old school, I know. Dad doesn't know I'm calling. He and Grandma Diana have been pretty stressed lately, and I figured it might not be the best time to bring up family reunions." I found myself smiling despite the shock. That's probably wise. I don't know what happened between you all, and honestly, I don't really want to know. Family drama is exhausting. But I was wondering, would you maybe want to get coffee sometime, just to meet? I looked at the photograph on my kitchen table, the one of Ethan at 8 years old, grinning at the camera. Somewhere out there was a young woman who carried my genes but not my baggage, who wanted to know me for who I was, rather than what I had. "I'd like that very much," I said. We met the following Saturday at a coffee shop downtown. Sarah was tall and serious with Diana's eyes, but something else, a quality I recognized as integrity. She asked thoughtful questions about my life, my work, my interests, without once mentioning money or favors or help with family problems. "Dad used to talk about you sometimes," she said over her second latte. "When I was little, he'd get this sad look when he mentioned his father, but he never explained why you weren't around." "It's complicated," I said, which was both true and insufficient. "Most family stuff is, but I figure I'm old enough now to make my own decisions about who I want in my life." We talked for 3 hours. She was studying environmental science at the University of Nebraska, working part-time at a bookstore, saving money for graduate school. She was everything her father wasn't: honest, hardworking, thoughtful about the future. When we parted ways, she hugged me with the unself-conscious affection of someone who saw good in the world despite the evidence to the contrary. "Can we do this again?" she asked. "I'd like that very much." As summer settled over Lincoln like a comfortable blanket, I found myself living a life I hadn't imagined possible 6 months earlier. My volunteer work at the Literacy Center had expanded into tutoring college students in business math. Sarah and I met for coffee every other Saturday, building a relationship based on mutual respect rather than obligation or manipulation. The legal cases against Ethan and Diana had concluded with predictable results. Ethan faced 2 years in federal prison for investor fraud, while Diana received 18 months for donation fraud. Their assets had been seized to pay restitution, leaving them with nothing but each other and the consequences of their choices. I felt no satisfaction in their imprisonment, but no guilt either. Justice wasn't about revenge, it was about balance, about ensuring that actions had consequences and that victims had recourse. "Do you ever wonder if you were too harsh?" Sarah asked during one of our coffee meetings. She'd learned the basic facts of the family rift through conversations with her grandmother, though I suspected she'd gotten a heavily edited version. "Do you think I was?" I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. She considered this, stirring her drink thoughtfully. I think sometimes people make their own beds, you know? Dad's always been kind of dramatic. Everything was always someone else's fault, someone else's responsibility to fix. It was a remarkably mature observation from someone barely out of high school. "I spent 20 years wondering if I was the problem," I said. "If I'd been a better husband, a more successful father, maybe things would have been different. But they chose not to have you in their lives," she pointed out. "Even when you were trying, that's on them, not you." The wisdom of youth, uncluttered by decades of doubt and self-recrimination. Our relationship became the unexpected gift of my later years. Through Sarah, I discovered that family could be about choice rather than obligation, that love could exist without conditions or expectations. She never asked me for money, never treated me as an ATM or a solution to her problems. Instead, she asked about my real estate investments and took notes on my advice. She wanted to know about my literacy students and often brought books she thought they might enjoy. She was building her own life with the same careful attention to foundation that I'd learned to apply to property investment. In August, she called with news that surprised me. "I got a letter from Dad," she said, "from prison. He wants me to visit. Will you?" "I don't know. He says he's sorry that he's learned from his mistakes, but..." She paused. "I've heard that before, you know. Usually right before he needed something. What does your heart tell you?" "That people can change, but they have to want to, and they have to prove it over time, not just with words." I smiled, proud of her wisdom. "That sounds like a good approach. He also mentioned you. Said he'd like to apologize." The offer hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I wanted to cross. "Would you want that?" she asked gently. I thought about it for a long moment, watching traffic flow past the coffee shop window. 20 years of anger had finally burned itself out, leaving behind something that wasn't forgiveness exactly, but wasn't hatred either. Maybe it was just completion. "I think," I said finally, "that some apologies are more about the person giving them than the person receiving them. Your father needs to find his own peace with what happened. I've already found mine." Sarah nodded, understanding without needing more explanation. As autumn approached, I made a decision that surprised even me. I put my rental house up for sale and bought a small place near the university, close enough to Sarah's campus that we could have dinner together once a week if she wanted. The new house had a garden where I could grow vegetables and a front porch where I could sit in the evenings and watch students walk by, heading to libraries and study groups and all the possibilities that lay ahead of them. On moving day, as I packed the last of my belongings, I found the old family photograph buried in a kitchen drawer. Ethan at 8, grinning at the camera with gap-toothed joy. I looked at it for a long moment, remembering the man who had taken that picture, someone full of hope and love and belief in happy endings. That man had been broken by betrayal and disappointment, but he'd also been rebuilt by patience and perseverance and the discovery that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born into. I tucked the photograph into a box marked Memories and carried it to my new home, where the future was waiting with open arms and no expectations beyond what I was willing to give. 1 year later, I woke up on Christmas morning in my new house to the sound of someone moving around in my kitchen. For a moment, panic fluttered in my chest. Had someone broken in? Then I remembered. Sarah had asked if she could come over early to help with Christmas dinner. She'd wanted to cook for me, she said, to show her appreciation for everything I'd done for her. I padded downstairs in my robe to find her standing at my stove, making pancakes with the concentration of someone performing surgery. "Merry Christmas, Grandpa," she said without turning around. Grandpa. The word still caught me off guard sometimes, carrying with it the weight of possibility and the promise of futures I'd never dared imagine. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart." She decorated the kitchen while I slept. Nothing elaborate, just some evergreen boughs and a small poinsettia on the table. It was the first Christmas morning in 21 years that I hadn't woken up alone. "I have something for you," she said, flipping a pancake with professional skill. "You didn't need to get me anything. It's not something I bought." She set a plate in front of me and pulled an envelope from her back pocket. "It's something I wrote." I opened it carefully, finding several pages of handwritten text. The first line made my breath catch. "I never knew my grandfather was a hero until I was 18 years old." It was the story of our relationship, told from her perspective. How I'd taught her about integrity through example, about perseverance through my quiet rebuilding of my life, about forgiveness through my willingness to start over with someone new rather than remain trapped by old hurts. "I'm applying for a scholarship," she explained, sitting down across from me with her own plate. "They want an essay about someone who's influenced your life. I hope you don't mind that I wrote about you." I couldn't speak for a moment, overwhelmed by the gift of being seen, truly seen, by someone who mattered. "I'm honored," I managed finally. We ate breakfast as snow began to fall outside, talking about our classes and my students and the books we were both reading. It was ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. The kind of Christmas morning I'd dreamed about during all those years of solitude. Later, as Sarah helped me clean up, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Ethan's number. He'd been released from prison 2 months ago and had called several times, leaving messages that grew increasingly desperate as I continued to ignore them. This time, I answered. "Dad?" His voice was smaller than I remembered, stripped of the arrogance and entitlement that had once defined him. "I wasn't sure you'd pick up." "Merry Christmas, Ethan." Yeah, Merry Christmas." A pause. "Dad, I know I have no right to ask this, but I've been out for 2 months now and I can't find work. No one wants to hire someone with a fraud conviction. I was wondering if maybe..." There it was. Even from prison, even after losing everything, he was still looking for someone else to solve his problems. "I can't help you with money, Ethan," I said quietly. "I'm not asking for much. Just enough to get an apartment, maybe some interview clothes. I swear, I'll pay you back." I looked at Sarah, who was listening with the careful attention of someone trying to understand a foreign language. "The money isn't the problem," I said. "The problem is that you're still looking for shortcuts instead of solutions. You're still trying to avoid the consequences of your choices instead of learning from them. That's not fair. I've paid my debt to society. I went to prison. Prison was just the beginning, son. The real work starts now. Building a life based on honesty instead of schemes. Earning trust instead of demanding it. Contributing instead of just taking." Sarah walked over and squeezed my shoulder, a gesture of support that meant more than she could know. I don't know how to do that, Ethan said, and for the first time in our conversation I heard something that might have been genuine vulnerability. The same way I learned, I said. One day at a time, one choice at a time, one honest interaction at a time. There was a long silence. In the background I could hear Diana's voice, sharp with frustration. Tell him about the medical bills. Tell him I'm sick. Still running the same plays from the same playbook. I have to go, Ethan said finally. But Dad, I really am sorry. For all of it. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I needed you to know. I appreciate that, I said, and found that I meant it. Take care of yourself, Ethan. I hung up and looked at Sarah, who was watching me with curious eyes. Was that hard? She asked. No, I said, surprising myself with the honesty of it. Not anymore. We spent the rest of Christmas Day reading and talking and watching old movies. It was peaceful in a way I'd never experienced before. Not the peace of isolation, but the peace of connection without complication. As Sarah prepared to leave that evening, she paused at the door. You know what I realized today? She said. What's that? You're not just my grandfather, you're also my friend. I hugged her goodbye and watched her drive away through the gently falling snow. Then I went back inside to my quiet house, where the Christmas tree lights cast a warm glow over everything I'd built from the ashes of my old life. I thought about the man I'd been 20 years ago. Broken, bitter, consumed by the injustice of it all. He couldn't have imagined this ending, couldn't have seen past his pain to the possibility of genuine happiness. But sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's simply living well, loving freely, and discovering that the people who truly matter will find their way to you when the time is right. I turned off the Christmas lights and headed upstairs, already looking forward to tomorrow. Sarah had mentioned wanting to learn about real estate investment, and I had a lifetime of hard-won wisdom to share with someone who would actually listen, actually learn, actually appreciate the gift of guidance freely given. Outside, Lincoln slept under its blanket of snow, peaceful and quiet. Inside, an old man who had finally learned the difference between family and blood relations settled into bed with a heart full of contentment. The phone didn't ring that night, and for the first time in 20 years, I was grateful for the silence. If you enjoyed this story of justice, redemption, and the power of chosen family, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share in the comments below. Have you ever had to cut toxic family members out of your life? How did you find peace with that decision? Your stories matter, and this community is here to support each other through life's most difficult chapters. Thank you for watching, and may your own journey lead you to the peace and happiness you deserve.